Okay, good morning, everybody. Let's continue in the Imrei Yaakov. We were learning about the various laws of the four different kinds of shomer, which, just to review, are a shoel, a borrower, a socher, a renter, a shomer sachar, a person who is hired to guard something for pay, and a shomer chinam, a person who watches it as a favor without getting paid. And we go from highest level of responsibility to lowest level of responsibility. A shoel is liable for all liabilities except for Mesam Achmas Malacha. If the animal dies in the course of, or if the object breaks down in the course of operation, of normal operation. The two middle categories, both a renter and a paid guard, have a middle level liability. They're exempt from mishaps, completely unforeseen, but they are liable for theft and loss and certainly for negligence. And a shomer chinam, who's doing you a favor, is only liable for negligence, but is not liable for theft or loss. Okay, so continuing along some of the details of liability, Isa Bigamara, Amar Shmuel, Kisafim Ein Lahem Shmira Ela Bekarka. The Gemara makes an interesting statement. It says, if you are hired or asked to guard cash, the only proper way to guard cash is by burying it in the ground. There really is no other reliable way to watch it to make sure that no one will come after it. The Kas of Harambam, Duhu Hadin Bilashono Shel Zahav Va'avanim Tovos, She'ein Lahem Shmira Ela Bekarka. And the Rambam adds to that, and he says, with gold bullion and precious gems, the halacha is the same, that the only way to protect them is to bury them. V'imlo shomer osan kach, avilei posheya. And if you don't guard them in that way, then you will be called negligent if they are stolen from wherever you are storing them. Now remember, we're dealing with the ancient world before we have safes and we have security systems, okay? And therefore, if I'm watching precious gems, diamonds for someone, and I don't keep them stored in the ground, but rather I keep them in my closet, then I'm called negligent. So even if I'm doing my friend a favor by watching his gems, I will be liable. Umi kol makom. Kasvu haposkim l'didan ein tzarich shmira bekarka. However, the later poskim say that that does not apply today. He says, Shaharei hadavar yadua she'ein derech b'nei adam achshav lishmor ksafim bekarka. Because that's not the norm of how people secure items. People don't put things in the ground anymore. B'chol hamafkid al da'as sheyishmor kederech shebnei adam regilim lishmor ba'oso zman hu mafkid. He says, and therefore, whatever the standard method of security for any given time and place is considered to be adequate from a halachic standpoint. So if you live in the 18th century and they've already invented safes, then by keeping gold bullion or gems in a safe, you're fulfilling your obligation. And the person can't say, well, look at the Gemara. The Gemara says you should have put it in the ground. But no one does that anymore. And similarly, in the 21st century, if we have security systems that are quite advanced, and you just have to get the security system that people would use for something of that value, But there's another reason you can exempt someone for using a modern security system and not putting it in the ground. Mishum dahada amru diksafim ein lahem shmira ela bekarka, ainu dafka liditu shahayu lahem batim ru'im basadot. He says, think about when that halacha was written. It's when people had homes that were not sturdy, and they would build their homes without security systems on their doors and windows out in the field. And they would have, therefore, an abundance of just soil surrounding a house that really had no method of securing itself. But today, that's not the case. Today, our homes are considered secure, and therefore, you don't need to bury things in the ground in order to fulfill your guardianship. Isha Nisua Shesho'ala Ayin Beposkim. So then he says, it's important to know that if a married woman borrows something, the poskim discuss what the liability of the husband is. V'yesh omrim degam kishabal poter min hadin aminhag l'chayvo v'chein ikar. There are some poskim who conclude that even if you could argue that technically the husband is not to be held liable because he was not a party to the loan, nonetheless, the minhag is to hold the husband liable, and that's considered to be the main halacha. The imshala kli letzarach habayis biyadiyaso chayev habal kemo shoel ragil. And certainly, if a woman borrows a utensil that she needs for household use, and the husband is aware of that, she goes to her neighbor and says, "I need a measuring cup. Can you lend me a measuring cup?" And the woman says, "Sure." And the husband knows. He says, "Where'd you get that measuring cup?" "Oh, it's from Marge across the street." So, and then she breaks it. So, of course, even though the woman can claim, "I have none of my own assets, they're my husband's assets," the husband will certainly be liable in that case. Okay, so when it comes to laws of guardianship and liability, you look at a couple as being one unit. Shomer Sachar Chayev B'Geneva Va'aveda. Next, a paid guard, someone who is paid to watch an item for you, is liable for loss and theft. V'hakavanahi avhecha shelo pasha b'shmiraso ela shamar hadavar kedin. And this is true even when we say he's liable for theft or loss, it means that he wasn't negligent. He locked it up properly. He put it in a secure place, and his house was broken into, and the item was stolen. If he was not being paid for his guardianship, he would be exempt. So if someone asks you to watch their dog or to watch their item and it gets lost, the dog runs away, and you did everything you were supposed to do as far as watching the dog, or someone breaks into your house while your friend is away and they steal not only your stuff, but your friend's stuff as well. So the halacha is, if you're not being paid, you're not liable. If you are being paid, you are liable. But since you're being paid, you wouldn't be liable. But if it is stolen or lost because of a complete mishap that was unforeseen, that you could not have controlled, kagon sheba alav lista mizuyan. So let's say armed robbers hold you up, you get held up at gunpoint. So in that situation, that's considered to be onus. Theft is different from armed robbery. Theft is considered to be your liability if you're being paid, but armed robbery is considered to be onus, because there even when you're with the item, there's nothing that you can do other than surrender the item. You're not obligated to give up your life. A fire is considered to be loss. That's considered to be loss. That's not considered to be onus, if I'm not mistaken. Afilu imgam hashomer hayalo neshek. And this is true even if the person watching the item is also armed. You're not obligated, and this is a very interesting idea. Maybe it's more of the Hollywood issue, right? But in general, when someone pulls a gun on you, even if you're armed, it's not advisable to pull your gun out on them. And the reason is because, and he says in the parentheses, because someone who initiates the robbery is more willing to risk their lives than a person who's willing to defend. So don't think that just because you have a gun, you're going to be okay. It's usually better, even when you're armed with a pistol, to surrender whatever the guy's looking for than to try and have a gunfight. Well, I mean, the gun lobby would probably acknowledge that. In other words, in all fairness to the gun lobby, the reason for having guns is not to get into a gunfight. The reason for having guns is to, when there's a total breakdown in society, it's a good idea to have a way of defending your home. But anyway, I digress. But the point is that you're right. In other words, you want to make sure that violence will not, the threat of violence will not deter a robber, is essentially what he's saying. Okay. Okay, let me just continue. Oh, the next one, the next case is fire. We just turned the page. Okay. If a fire breaks out in the city, not just in your home, but in the entire area, so then and the items get destroyed through that fire, then you're an onus. If it's localized to your home, I think you're liable because that's considered to be loss. But if it's a fire that did not start on your property, but just spread to your property, so then you're an onus and you're pater. Go ahead. Yes, that would be onus, right? That would be onus also. Right. So for example, you leave an appliance on, or you leave the candles lit. That's called aveda. That's called loss. That's not called onus, right? And furthermore, when we say that if it was not an onus, if it was not a total mishap, then you're liable as a shomer sachar. That's only when you made no effort to save the item. But if you tried to save the item, but you were unsuccessful, so that's also called onus. So even in a case where the fire breaks out in your house because you left the candles in an unsafe place, and then the house started to burn, and it wasn't safe for you to retrieve the item, but you tried your best, then at some point you would also be deemed to be an onus. Another example of onus, there can be theft. It is a total onus. Kagon, shenosan haksafim tachas hakarka ba'omek me'ama. That let's say you buried an item 100 cubits deep in the ground. Okay. The only way to steal it, right? Because you have a light shining on the area where you buried it, is let's say a ganaf starts digging a tunnel. So what are you supposed to do in that situation? Oh, hikifo b'choma shel barzel, or you surround the item in a fortress with walls of iron. Oh, yimnafal alav choli v'lo yochal l'shomra, or let's say you became ill and you were no longer able to watch the item. So in all of those cases, that's really called an onus because you've done every single thing that is possible to protect it, but nonetheless, it got stolen. He says, while there are poskim who say that you're still liable in those cases because there was no armed robbery, there was no fire, and so forth. Aval hashach sham sifkatan dalid svir le'ledina de ha'ikru ka'poskim de geneva bonus gomer gam shomer sachar potter. But the shach disagrees. And he says, in those cases where you did everything possible, humanly possible, and it still got stolen, you're going to be an onus and you're going to be putter. Okay, next. Kaimalon, dechol ha'umnim shomrei sachar he. We paskin that if a person is an artisan, okay, he's a worker, and he accepts an item of yours to work on it. So you drop off your suit for dry cleaning, okay? And what is the status of the worker who you dropped off your item to work on to tinker with your item? What is his status? He has the status of a paid guard. You're compensating him for his service, but part and parcel of that service is to protect your garment, is to protect your item. And therefore, he has a din of shomer sachar, and therefore he will be liable for onus, and he'll be liable for loss or theft.
And they watch it up.
Yes.
They root the dress.
Yes.
Right? And then what happens is the dry cleaner tries to come back to over to us or whatever and say there's something wrong with the material. So or something like that, and then it becomes a bit of an issue.
So when you say help educate us, when you say there's something wrong with the material, what does that mean? Like, what is there such a legal claim?
You couldn't hold up to the dry cleaning. We put on all our garments because we don't trust hand washing. They're not checking materials to put in a washing machine, so they say everything dry clean only. That's what it says on the label.
Right. But even dry cleaning, they use some kind of caustic material.
So that's why there's various types of cleaners. Some are more skilled than others at it, and they know what type of solvents to use or whatever else they're doing.
Okay.
This becomes an issue.
So, right. In other words, what is the level? Is there some liability for a manufacturer of a garment to make sure that it's color fast and that it can endure a dry cleaning? If that becomes, in other words, if standard treatment of garments that cannot go through a laundry is dry cleaning, then there does become some level of liability for a manufacturer, is what you're suggesting, to make sure that when he manufactures a garment, it can at least endure a dry cleaning. So that's true. So we're speaking generically at this point. I'm not sure how that would be addressed in halacha, that specific situation. But anyone who takes in an item, whether it's a garment or whether I drop off my VCR, no one has a VCR anymore, but whatever, in the old days, you take your VCR to the repairman or your TV to the repairman and drop it off and get it fixed. But whatever item or whatever appliance you're dropping off, no one fixes appliances anymore. We just throw it out and order a new one from Amazon. But whatever your item belongs to you that you're dropping off to an artisan to take care of, their status is a shomer sachar. Part of their payment is to watch the item for you. As I just said, since they're getting paid to clean the item or to repair the item, that part and parcel of that payment is to watch the item as well. So let's say you drop off a watch for a watchmaker to fix, or you drop off a piece of jewelry to a jeweler for them to fix it, okay? Or to, my wife has this thing that with every new child that we had, she would add a little tiny stone to a pendant on her necklace, right? So she drops it off and she says, please put on a new stone and whatever. If their store is broken into and they are robbed, so then they have to pay each customer for whatever was deposited with them. Now, let's say the artisan calls up the customer after they've put in the new stone, or they fixed the appliance, or they've dry cleaned the item, and they say, your item is ready, come and pick it up. O sha'amar lo gemartiv, v'lo lakhu haba'olam es hakli, harei ha'uman shomer china. So from that point forward, once the item is ready for pickup, then the owner of the appliance store or the dry cleaner reverts from a shomer sachar to a shomer chinam. And it's a fascinating, it's very logical when you think about it, but his halachic status changes once the item is ready for pickup. He says it'll be ready on Tuesday. So Tuesday elapses and the customer doesn't pick it up. By Wednesday, the level of liability of the storekeeper has been demoted from shomer sachar to shomer chinam, because now you're not paying me anymore to watch your item. I'm doing you a favor by keeping your item in the store, right? So it's the halachic status changes from before it's ready for pickup until after it's ready for pickup. Aval im omar belashon have mos vetula shelcha adayin shomer sachar hu debazeh giladaito sherotza la'akev hakli biyado ad sheyitin lo tchila scharo. So he says it all depends on how you say it. This is an interesting parenthesis. He says, if he says pick up your item, then he's a shomer chinam. If, however, he says first pay and then pick up your item, so then that's suggestive that he's holding the item until you pay him, in which case he is still a shomer sachar, which is a little bit difficult to hear because usually there's a contract, an implicit contract between the dry cleaner, let's say, or the jeweler and the customer, that when you pick up your item, you will pay. So he's basically saying that it all depends on how it was stipulated. But once let's say a person pays in advance for the item, so the artisan, the storekeeper, is a shomer sachar until the item is ready for pickup. Once the item is ready for pickup, since payment has already been made, so then he reverts back to a shomer chinam. Interesting. Hasocher mechavero behema okelim dino kishomer sachar liischayiv b'gneva v'aveda v'lipater me'onsin. Okay, when you rent an animal, or if you rent an appliance from a company or from a private person, you become a shomer sachar. You're that's your status. In other words, when you rent something, your status of liability is for theft and loss because you're benefiting from the item, but you're not a shoel, you're not a borrower. In other words, you're actually paying for the use of the item. So therefore your liability is lowered to that of a shomer sachar, a paid guard. And so therefore you'll be liable for theft and loss, but you're not liable for mishaps, for onus. Even though you're paying, so you should expect that your liability is reduced. It's reduced, but not to the level of being only liable for negligence, because at the end of the day, you are benefiting from the appliance or the animal. Because to wit, if you were just a borrower, you would be fully liable even for onsin. So the fact that you're paying lowers your liability, but that doesn't eliminate it entirely. Next, if a person borrows an animal or some appliance or any other kind of chattel, and a mishap occurs, total mishap, kagon shemesa, onishba al yedei listin mezuyan. So, for example, the animal dies, and it doesn't die in the course of work. It just, all of a sudden, you left it in the garage, the animal or the barn overnight. You come back the next morning and the donkey is dead. okay? And that's what we call an onus. Or um, armed robbers came in and held you up at gunpoint and stole the item. So even though that's a total onus, you're still liable because you borrowed the appliance. All benefit is yours. You're not paying for it. You're not. So because you've assumed it's total benefit without any cost to you, you assume full liability. And certainly, therefore, you'll be liable for theft and loss, regular theft and loss. The only thing that you'll be exempt from is if the normal wear and tear over the course of the use of the appliance. So invariably, like you borrow a lawnmower, invariably the blades of the lawnmower will eventually dull over the course of time. So that you're not liable for any kind of depreciation of the appliance through use. Another example, let's say you borrow a snowblower. Hopefully those are done with for the season. But you borrow a snowblower from your neighbor and you use it regularly. In other words, you're not using it in any kind of irresponsible way. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the use, the engine conks out. So that's considered to be normal wear and tear of an appliance, and that you will be putter for. That's not called an onus. That's just called regular use. And velo rak im nizoka ela afilu imesma machmas malacha putter. And not only if the animal is injured, but even if it totally dies, right? Not only if there's normal wear and tear, but even if the animal or appliance completely breaks, and it's irreparable. The dafka imlo shino lasos bo davar acher chutz mehamalacha sheshala bishvila avalim shina chai. But that's provided, and we learned this before, that you haven't changed its use in any way that the owner normally uses it for. So if you borrow a donkey, and the donkey is used to only schlepping things within the marketplace, and you instead take the donkey out to the country and take it up the mountain, and because of the higher altitudes, the donkey is not used to the thinner air, and it dies, so then you're going to be liable, even though you're using it in the course of work, but it's not work that the donkey is used to. Or if you use an appliance in an improper way. So let's say you use the snowblower, not just for blowing fresh snow, but you try to use the snowblower to break up the ice, which I've never used a snowblower before, but I understand that if you try to stup into it stuff that it's not meant, it's too hard or chunky, it'll break the snowblower. So you have to know exactly how to use the appliance. And Kaimalan the She'ela beba'olim potter b'chol hashomrim. We also have a halacha that if you borrow something and are using it in the presence of the owner, and something happens, even in anything that happens, you're going to be exempt because there the owner can watch you and tell you what to do. So if you borrow the snowblower and the owner is right there with you, he can't say that you misused it because he was right there. He would have stopped you. And finally, we're almost at the end of this halacha. When we say that a shoel is liable for all mishaps, that's true even if he hasn't even started using the appliance yet. Once you actually just take possession of it, legally, you're liable, even if you haven't even started using it. And finally, das harbe poskim de gam hecha shachefetz hayam mevutach, the hamafkid mekabel de me bituach upitzui me chevrat habituach, bichol makom ein hashomer nifter metashlum. Finally, many poskim suggest that even when the item is insured, the owner takes out an insurance policy to cover theft or loss, then the person who's borrowing it says, what's the big deal? You have an insurance policy. No, it does not get him off the hook. In other words, he'll be liable for the deductible. He'll be liable for any delays in payment. and ultimately the liability is his. If the guy gets compensated by the insurance company, it'll be an interesting shaila to see who's liable for the raise in the premiums. So borrow my car, you get into an accident, and you say, well, what's the big deal? There's an insurance policy, but now my premiums have gone up. So that's an interesting discussion within the poskim that I think we need to examine more carefully.
So if you get paid back from the insurance company, then do you in turn you can't do double dipping, right?
Right. There's no double dipping. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care.